There we go. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a midweek stream. Me and obviously John D, as always. This channel seems to just not function if John D's not here, so it's basically his channel at this point. But we are here for, I don't know how often this will be, but we are here for what's hoping to be a new series, depending on how you guys react to it. Where practically you guys are the producers of the series. This is you guys' takes, and we're just reacting to them. So without you, this series doesn't exist. So before we get into it, basically what this is going to be is maybe a month or so ago, I asked you guys to leave some of your NBA basketball takes in a community tab, and now today is the episode where myself and John D are going to react to them, give our opinions on it. Do we think it's a good take? Do we think it's a bad take? Do we understand it? What is our opinion on the take, etc. And if you guys react to this well and enjoy it, this could be a more common thing. If you guys don't enjoy it, this will be the one and only episode. So it just depends on how you guys react to it. But John D, how are you?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good. Twice a week for the Hoop Talk podcast. This is something I've been really trying to, push for. So this is fantastic. This is fantastic.
Yeah, you've been trying to get me to stop load managing, but Joel Embiid is my favorite player and stuff. So just taking inspiration. But I want to get into the title of today's episode: Steve Nash is better than Steph Curry. And we got that from a take from Howard.19. He said Steve Nash is a better offensive engine than Steph. Nash does not rely on anyone to extend the advantage. He also has a James Harden take, but we might get to. But for now, we're going to focus on the Steve Nash take. Steve Nash is a better offensive engine than Steph. Nash does not rely on anyone to extend the advantage. John D, what are your thoughts on Steve Nash being a better offensive engine than Steph?
I mean, I think if you look at the numbers, it pretty much provides it for you. Steve Nash has been able to lead top tier offenses. Even the year with no Amari Stoudemire, Steve Nash was still able to provide a top level offense, and that's a guy that can raise a floor better than anybody. And I think with Steph, I think the ceiling may just be higher. Like we've seen Steph be the engine of an offense that can win a championship with his volume and his gravity, but Steve Nash is always able to space the floor, move well without the ball, create for others, be manipulative in pick and rolls, spoon feed buckets for some guys on the offensive end. So if I would say throughout a full 82 game season, I do think Nash is probably going to uplift the offense with less around him than Curry can. So I don't think it's too crazy.
I see the vision. I think one thing that for me is I've become lower on Steph in general. I'm not saying he's trash, but I've become lower on Steph in general. And a large part of that is because of not how reliant he is on other people, but it is different when Steph can create an advantage, but he does rely on someone else to create the best shot out of that advantage. That's what makes the Warriors so dangerous. But when we talk about the individual of Steph, I think compared to other players, I think when you have guys who can create and capitalize on advantages themselves, I do think that's probably more dangerous for the individual than it is with Steph. We talk all the time about the Warriors 4-on-3 and how dangerous that is with Draymond in the short roll when you got cutters or you got guys open for threes and stuff. And that comes from Steph getting blitzed in pick and roll with them trapping and he's finding the pocket pass, which is tremendously valuable. But I think it's a bit different when you have someone who's able to put two on the ball and also find the open man themselves and create the open shots themselves without relying on someone else to create those layups. And Steve Nash is like the most voluminous, I think that's a word, layup playmaker of all time when it comes to generating layups for his teammates. Steph has he generates layups with his off-ball gravity and stuff, like when he draws two to the ball and Draymond's finding cutters and stuff. But that's him relying on Draymond to play make off of Steph's gravity, whereas Steve Nash is playmaking off of his own gravity to find those layups himself. So I think that's the distinction I would make. And then when it comes to the ceiling of your offense, the slight pushback I would have is the Suns' offenses perform better in the postseason than the Warriors did. And that includes the KD years. So it's I don't know what more we really need to see. The offense is always translated in, well, not always. I think 08 was a bad year for the Suns in the playoffs when they played the Spurs. But typically the Suns offense always translated to the postseason. I know 05 is like the best postseason offense for any team that got to the conference finals or beyond. So a larger sample than just one series. And the 2017 Warriors, I believe, if I find them, are the the sixth best playoff offense of all time. And the fact they're actually below the 2017 Cavs. Now you factor in
People
some
forget about how good that offense
that
was.
2017 Cavs. That's another take for another day about how good the 2017 Cavs were. But the Suns routinely dominated on offense. And in fact, they actually have two different iterations of teams that went far in the playoffs and had a better offense than any Warriors team. 2010 was a plus 12.6 relative offense in the postseason. And 2005, like I said, was a plus 16.2. The Warriors peaked at 11.4, and that's the KD years. If you look at a Warriors team that didn't include KD, the best they ever got to in the postseason was plus 6.5. No, that's 2018. The best they ever got to was plus 6 in the postseason in 2022. So I do think the ceiling of Steve Nash offenses statistically have shown to be better. But obviously there's more factors to it than just how well did the offense perform. So I don't think it's a bad take. Is basically what I'm saying. I don't think it's a bad take.
Bad either.
I think this is like, it goes further into the Steve Nash stuff. I think if we get to a point where we're entertaining Steve Nash better offensively than Steph Curry, or we're talking about Steve Nash as one of the 5-6 best offensive players of all time, I think it gets to a point where it's like, why isn't Steve Nash one of the 15 best players ever? Is Steve Nash so bad on defense that he can't be viewed as a better player than, for example, a Kevin Durant? He can't be viewed as a better player than a Magic Johnson. He can't be viewed as a better player than a Chris Paul, or just someone who's amazing, but maybe isn't producing top 5, top 6 levels of offense. And the reason I brought up Magic Johnson is because I know we hear a lot about Steph Curry versus Magic Johnson on offense. And if Steve Nash can enter that conversation, does that mean Steve Nash could be better offensively than Magic Johnson? I'm not saying he is. I'm saying, would that by default put him in that conversation also? It's a conversation I'd be willing to have personally, but it's just, I understand that Steve Nash isn't viewed in that light. So the moment you start putting him into conversations with multiple time champions, consensus top 10 players, it's like, what are we doing? But I think the results speak for themselves when it comes to Steve Nash on the offensive side of the ball. So Howard, I stand with you personally. I stand with you. Not in the sense that I agree with you, but I stand with you in the sense that I see where you are coming from. So it sounds like John said he's not mad at it, and I also said I'm not mad at it. So
yeah, I'm not mad at it at all. The thing when I hear people when I hear people's opinions, if I can see like where you're coming from with this idea and like where your opinions are coming from, and it's like a logical opinion or a logical explanation to it, I'll see where you're coming from, even if I agree with it or not. If you're just saying anything like, oh yeah, I think Mike Conley was better than Magic Johnson, and just say anything like that. But if you have a good explanation to it, I'll hear you out.
Before we move on to the next one, I want to say I am reading comments from the community tab, but if you have a take that you like really want us to react to today, if you send a super chat, we will react to your take in today's episode. If not, leave a comment after this stream, and if we decide to do another episode of this, I will take the takes from the comments of this video. So those are the two options. If you didn't leave a comment on the community tab, leave a comment after this video for the next one, or send a super chat to get it reacted to today. Now, the next take comes from, how do I say this? Asa Tava 8323 said peak Shaq is closer to peak MJ and LeBron than he is to whoever the fourth best peak is. So he's saying basically Shaq is closer to MJ and LeBron than the next closest person is to Shaq at his peak. What's your thoughts on that? I think that one might be a slightly hotter take. How do you feel about that?
I would lean towards Shaq. Yes, I would lean towards Shaq. I think with his post presence and the amount of gravity he had down there, and just being able to pass out of the post and create open looks for the guys around him, like Rick Fox, Derek Fisher, Kobe Bryant, Ron Harper. These guys got really good looks all the time. on top of Shaq being one of the better defenders in the league throughout that 2000 to 2001 championship run. I think in the playoffs, he averaged about 31 and 15 on extremely high efficiency, finishing around the rim, blocking shots, passing out of the post, playing in transition. I think he was really good at that too. So if you're saying you want to take 2000 and 2001 Shaq over some players that we may have in their peaks like Kareem or Magic or Jokic or other guys like that, I'm not gonna really push back because I can understand where you would get that rim dominance and how much it opens up more for the other team. So if you constantly have somebody that you have to worry about down low and it's attracting multiple defenders, I mean, we've literally seen big men get signed for minimums just to go out there and hack him at the free throw line. So it's the dominance is there, opening up more shots for players around him. That was there. He had a really good stretch where he was one of the best defenders in the league. That was there as well. So I don't hate the Shaq take at all.
I think for me, the answer to this comes from how long is a peak. If you're talking single seasons, so 2000 Shaq is closer to MJ and LeBron than the next closest person is to him, I think I agree. That singular season, I'm inclined to agree. That's when Shaq's defense peaked. That's when his offense peaked. And it's very rare you see someone's defense and offense peak at the same time. So just having that alone, I think, is what makes Shaq so deadly. And then you factor in the fact that he was literally unguardable. The best method of defending him was fouling him. And when you look at the rate of offense at that time, fouling Shaq, sending him to the line, I think in the 2000 postseason, I want to say he shot like 45% from the line. I want to say. And even then, you're still providing a very, very good half-court offense with him shooting one of the worst rates at the free throw line in his career. So I think when you talk singular seasons, it's very possible that's true. Shaq was one of the 5 best defenders in the sport at the time in 2000s. He was the best offensive player in the league, in my opinion. He was the most unstoppable force the NBA has probably ever seen. He was a relentless off-ball mover, which he doesn't get enough credit for. It's not like he just parked himself on the left block and just waited. If he didn't have an angle, he was spinning. He was trying to seal people right under the rim. So that constant activity just put pressure on defenders as well. Opened up extra lanes. He didn't provide the typical spacing of shooting threes, but I've always said teams didn't leave Shaq's body, because if you left Shaq's body, it was free offensive rebounds every single time, free putbacks. So he was providing spacing on drives in that regard. He had really great hands, really soft touch. It's not like he was just drop stepping and dunking on everyone. He had this little baby hook, like out to like 12 feet that he could go to. The ugliest turnaround jumper I've ever seen, but it used to go in at a solid rate. And he could pass out of the post too. So when he was drawing these relentless doubles, he could make quick decisions and quick reads that created open shots. So I don't see what the answer was to Shaq offensively. And when I had the Shaq versus Steph Curry conversation in the PCL, I found out that from 95 to 2000 to 2003, Shaq led a +8 offense, +10, +6, +10, +5, +9, +13.5, +6, and +6 in the postseason. All of those offenses, bar 2, are better than anything the Warriors had without Kevin Durant. And that's just Shaq year in, year out, just as an offensive player. Now, we can understand he had Penny Hardaway, he had Kobe Bryant, he had Eddie Jones and Nick Van Exel before Kobe Bryant ascended. So we can understand it comes down to teammates. It's not just one player impacts offense completely. But you watch those teams, you watch our team's game plans. You alluded to teams signing bigs just for the sole reason of fouling him. It's hard for me to say anyone beyond MJ and LeBron are particularly close to him at his peak. The issue is the peak was just very short-lived, especially in the regular season. Like 2001, for example, I think you got peak Shaq in the postseason. You got that. Yeah. The issue was in the regular season, the defensive effort was so inconsistent that I couldn't call that comparable to 2000. And then by 2002 and 2003, I just don't think he was able to give you that level of intensity consistently throughout the season. So it's really a single season peak where I would agree with you. And then once I start extending that peak 2, 3, 4 years, that's where I'm like, he's probably closer to 4 and 5 than he is to 1 and 2. But single season peaks, I'm inclined to agree with you. And I could potentially argue that he could be better than one of those two, MJ or LeBron. That's how high I am on the single season of Shaq's peak. So that's where I stand on it. The next one we're going to get to Let me see what I find interesting. I'm gonna save one for now, and then I'm gonna get to the super chats. Okay, so I got one ready. Okay, but before we do that, super chats, because 2 people have sent takes. Shout out to Kendrick Starr. He said Steph Curry is top 5 of all time. Very simple take, very run of the mill take. John D, is Steph Curry top 5 of all time?
I don't think so, in my opinion. I have him looking right outside the top 10, around, I would say, 12 to 17, in that range. Outside of my top 10, I could really just look around and be like, oh, maybe I would have this guy here. I haven't really looked too deep into my 10 to 20, but top 5, if you just go player for player, I would say LeBron, Jordan, Kareem, Magic, Shaq. I still wouldn't have him over Duncan. I wouldn't have him over Hakeem. So no, I wouldn't say Steph was in my top 5, but he's definitely in the 10 to 15 conversation.
Do you want to bless us with your top 10? Do you want to do that? You want to tell us the top 10?
See, my top 10 has always been a little, not wishy-washy, but I always make adjustments. So the one that I've been leaning on the past month, I would say LeBron 1, Jordan 2, Kareem 3, Magic 4, Shaq 5, Kobe 6, Duncan 7, Hakeem 8, Larry Bird 9, and Bill Russell 10.
Bill Russell 10. Interesting. Okay. For me, a lot of people know I don't really have like a list to go to per se. But I can say I'm fairly confident I wouldn't have Steph Curry in the top 5. I think as a pure offensive weapon, I think he is firmly in that top 5. At worst, I'd probably have him around 6. I couldn't see him any lower than 6. I do think there's 6 guys in contention for the top 5 spots. Probably off the top of my head, yes. Defensively, I think at his best, I do think he was a neutral to a slight positive. I do think his first 6 years of his career, he was a very clear negative on that side of the ball. And as someone who factors in longevity in terms of how I would evaluate players, I do think Steph having 9, 10 high-level seasons, and then you factor in the amount of postseason injuries he's dealt with, I think just in terms of games played at that highest level is where I would struggle with having Steph in my top 5. But I do think peak-wise, I think you could get him in the top 10. Still then, I think 5 might be a stretch. I know a lot of people are like, he's the best playmaker ever, he's the best shooter ever, he's the most portable player ever. I don't know if I subscribe to any of those things. Besides the shooting, of course, he is the best shooter ever. I have a hard time saying top 5 personally. So yeah, I don't think I'd agree with top 5. It doesn't mean I could tell you who my top 5 is. I just don't think I could tell you Steph Curry is in it. I think I could say that with firm confidence. I don't think I'd have Steph in my top 5. We got a couple more now that people realize they can get their take answered instantly with a super chat. In a similar vein, not top 5, but Duke Did It said Kevin Durant is a top 10 player of all time. Now, John D, you just read out your top 10, so obviously you don't have Kevin Durant in your top 10. But I'll ask you, is Steph Curry higher than Kevin Durant?
When I was younger, I used to make that case. I'm like, yeah, Steph's better than KD. KD needed Steph, all that stuff. But no, I would probably have KD higher than Steph. I think being one of the best scorers of all time, being 7 foot and can get to the spots the way that Kevin Durant can, and the longevity of Kevin Durant is extremely underrated. If you talk about longevity compared to a lot of these players that are in this top 15, top 10, I think Kevin Durant matches up with a lot of them. I mean, he's had multiple season-ending injuries, has come back and played to the level that you would have expected him to if he didn't get injured. He's averaged close to near 50, 40, 90 seasons, 35 points per game in the finals on 50, 40, 90. Just being able to elevate offenses just off pure mid-range scoring, which teams have been able to walk away from or move away from towards the newer age of basketball. And Kevin Durant still provides a high level of offense, even focusing on the mid-range. The post-game, the fact that he's gotten so much better as a playmaker and a defender later in his career. Like, we don't see a lot of 37, 38-year-olds be one of, if not the best defender on their team at their age after sustaining multiple season-ending injuries. So I would have KD higher than Steph. And it took me a while to really recognize KD's greatness because he ruined a lot. He ruined a lot.
I was pretty loud about how I think Steph was better than Kevin Durant when they were both on the Warriors. And I still believe that. I still think the best player on those teams was Steph Curry. In large part, I just do think he was the most offensively impactful. And I think I think he was just the more valuable player. And in most instances, I do think I'd probably say the more valuable player is usually the better player. In some instances, I do think that's not the case anymore because at some point you are just as valuable as what you're replacing. So if a team has a better replacement for you than someone else, that doesn't make them better than you because the team finds it harder to replace them. That just might mean that they lack depth in that position or their skill set is more rare, but more rare doesn't mean better all the time. So I think generally speaking, I still probably do subscribe to that, but I do think there are exceptions. But I think what makes it a conversation for me, and this, once again, it comes down to criteria. I know a lot of people value accolades and stuff to that degree. So I can understand having Steph over KD. Obviously, he won more championships. And then you got like the stuff about how Steph won without KD. KD didn't win without Steph. But anyone who's watching this live and who watches this after the fact, unless they don't know me and it's their first experience with me, those stuff just don't really come into play when I'm talking about who I think is the better player or who I think is the greater player. For me, I think the longevity gap is what makes this a real conversation. Kevin Durant, by year 3, was a top 5 player in the NBA, in my opinion. So from 2010 until he tore his Achilles, he was a top 5 player in the NBA. That's 10 years. And then you got 1 year where he was hurt, so 2015. So that's 9 years of top 5 production year in, year out. He then comes back and in 2021 is a top 5 player again. And then we could start talking about how there might be some sort of a decline, which is fine. But I think all of us would agree he's still a top 10 player. And I think when KD's providing consistent top 10 value for 15 years, consistent top 5 value for 9 years, has played more playoff games than Steph, I believe. Let me check. Actually, I don't want to lie to the people. Kevin Durant has played 170 postseason games. And Steph Curry has played, let's see. And Steph Curry has played 147. Okay, so I was right. So 23 more postseason games. Kevin Durant is one of the best scorers we've ever seen. I do believe he's a better scorer than Steph Curry. I also believe Kevin Durant is more portable than Steph Curry. I think he can fit into many more systems and you don't have to work around him in the same way you have to work around Steph Curry. I do obviously think he has flaws in terms of being a primary playmaker, but I think with Steph Curry, you have to get defenders around him. With Kevin Durant, I think he can play a huge part in your team defense in a way that Steph Curry can't. I think his off-ball scoring is tremendously valuable, as is Steph Curry's. But I think at 7 feet, he offers you more utility, more versatility. So I think that favors Kevin Durant. I think Kevin Durant is the best mid-range scorer of all time. And I think mid-range scoring, especially in the modern era, is probably the most valuable form of scoring in smaller samples than any form of scoring. And what I mean by that is over the course of a game, obviously you're going to want to generate free throws, layups, threes, because those are the analytically favored shots. But when you come down to the wire, you come down the stretch of games where possessions become more finite. It's not an 100 possession game anymore. You've got 9 possessions. True shooting goes out the window. In my opinion, this might be a hot take. True shooting goes out the window. It comes down to we need to score. We need to stop the other team from scoring. Because shooting 40% from 3 is great because it's like, well, on 10 shots, you've got 12 points and someone else who shoots 50% from 2 has only got 10 points on those 10 shots. The issue is once you start running out of possessions, there's no guarantee you're going to get 10 shots. So it comes down to how many shots can we make? And that becomes more important in my opinion. So I think when it comes down to that, you have Kevin Durant who can get a clear shot on demand whenever he wants and is the best mid-range scorer of all time. You've got a Kevin Durant who's been a positive on defense for, I want to say a decade, but I might be overestimating him slightly, but I want to say a decade, and is one of the best scorers of all time and has a clear longevity gap in the postseason and the regular season. I just think that makes it more of a conversation, despite the fact I think Steph peaked higher because of his peak as a top 5, top 6 offensive player that I don't think KD ever reached. But I do think the longevity makes it more of a conversation. Now, when it comes down to top 10, once again, I don't have a list. John D said he doesn't have him top 10. So I don't think I could tell you if I have him top 10. I'd lean towards no, probably, especially if I'm factoring in Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain and the guys who played before the three-point line. If I'm not factoring in those guys, I'd probably have him top 10. But once again, I can't tell you for sure. But I do think Kevin Durant and Steph Curry is a legitimate conversation away from, of course, the narratives and stuff. Because I can see Anton in the chat saying never one is a number one option. I don't know if he's new here, but I've seen him in the PC chat. But maybe this isn't the show for you. But if you want to like the video before you leave, that's fine. I just don't think we're talking about the same thing, which is fine. I just don't think that's what we're doing. But that's KD and Steph. The next super chat comes from Chaotic. Said MJ, LeBron, and Kobe are clearly the 3 best basketball players ever, not talking relative to era. So he's basically saying we are era taxing. We are acknowledging that the game gets more skilled and progresses. The 3 best basketball players are MJ, LeBron, and Kobe. John D, how do you feel about that?
I don't hate that. I don't hate it. It's just I don't necessarily say I would put Kobe in my top 3. Like he's right out. He's my 6. I don't know if anybody was just listening or you just joined, but I had Kobe as 6. And I don't necessarily hate the argument just having him at number 3 or saying those are the 3 best basketball players ever, because once again, Kobe is one of the greatest scorers of all time, one of the greatest mid-range scorers of all time, and is an extremely underrated playmaker and defender. In his best years, or right before his best years, he was a really good defender. And then once he started to grow a little bit more, he had a great 2-man game with Pau Gasol. But then again, I just don't know if the offense peaked at the same time the defense did. So once you're looking through some of Kobe's stints in his career, the defense was at its best, but then when the offense was at its best, he wasn't the best defender. So that's kind of pushed me away from having him top 3. But I wouldn't get upset with anybody who said Kobe wasn't top 3 or Kobe was top 3.
I think most of the people, well, I can't say most because a lot of people still do live by the narratives and stuff and what he did about Shaq and yada, yada, yada. But I think the most compelling argument for me for why Kobe would be top 3, because I think MJ and LeBron, I think it practically goes without saying at this point.
Yeah.
I think the most compelling argument for me about Kobe would be that I think he's the most skilled player ever. I think the only person who really comes close to him actually would be Kyrie, which kind of makes the argument less compelling because I don't think Kyrie is like in top 3 conversations. But I think Kobe matched the skill set with an impact at a level that Kyrie couldn't. So that would make the argument more compelling once again. So I'm going to stick with it. I think Kobe is the most skilled player ever. And I think when someone says not relative to era, they are factoring in skill above achievements and accolades and acknowledging that, for example, Bill Russell was great in his time, but we can acknowledge the 60s is not the 2000s.
Yeah.
Which I think is a fair thing to assess. I think if you don't rank relative to era, I think that's fair. Me personally, I do, because I think you're only as good as your contemporaries, and I'm going to rank you according to your contemporaries and who was better than their contemporaries by the widest margin. But I understand the non-relative to era ranking. And I think when you have arguably the most skilled player ever, who is also one of the best scorers ever, and I understand the defense and the offense didn't peak at the same time, but I think when you're talking about the top 3 of all time, I think we're not talking solely about peaks. So if I can factor in that Kobe at his peak defensively is one of the best point of attack guard defenders ever, and then Kobe at his peak offensively is one of the most resilient, best scorers of all time, while still being one of the elite playmakers and offensive players in the league. That's a pretty compelling case alongside some elite longevity. And then he's also the most skilled player to ever exist, in my opinion. So I look at him from that perspective of he didn't really have any flaws. He could score from multiple levels. He was a very good passer, contrary to the narrative that surrounds him.
For real.
He is, in my opinion, one of the best, or if not the best, difficult shot maker of all time. And then you factor in like, because once again, it's not relative to era. You factor in the level of competition that existed in the 2000s. I do think is steeper than most other eras. So when you factor in the level of competition that teams in the Western Conference, in particular in the 2000s, are going through, and Kobe's still able to remain resilient in series against teams like the San Antonio Spurs and those level of elite defenses, I think that's extremely valuable. And then he has the elite longevity. That would be the case, in my opinion, for Kobe being top 3. Now, do I subscribe to that case? No, because I rank relative to era. But if someone clarifies not relative to era, I do think there is a case to be made about Kobe being a top 3 player of all time. I just think that opens up the floor for other guys like Tim Duncan, and other guys who played post 2000s and even in the 90s like Hakeem to enter that conversation as well. So, but I do think Kobe has a case in that conversation to be in the top 3 based off of that. You guys are sending through a bunch of super chats, so the guys in the community section, they might just be lagging behind. They might just be lagging behind, unfortunately. But
be cooked.
We will get to them if we have time, because we are going to prioritize the people who respectfully sent in some money to get their take read out. So we're going to go with Sunder here, who said, was Luka's 3-point shooting last year an anomaly or an improvement? The percentages from the rest of his career and the playoff drop make me think it was a fluke. Before I let you answer that, John D, he's talking about Luka shooting 38% on 10 threes a game last year. And that has not been matched at any point in his career, and it wasn't matched in the postseason last year. So do you think Luka took a jump as a shooter, or he had an outlier shooting season?
Part of me just doesn't want to believe that 39% on 10 threes a game when most of them are off the dribble is a fluke. Like I don't want to believe that that's a fluke, because one, Luka's always going to create a solid shot for himself, especially off of step backs when he's going left and he's just creating that step back to create space. And I look at the playoffs, and it was a lot harder for him to really create space because he was hobbled. Now, I'm not going to keep bringing up that he was injured, but that's something that I believe was valuable or just interesting to see how he created space. And as much as he does live outside the arc, and he has gone down or gone away from driving to the rim more, I don't necessarily think it's a fluke. I still think he's probably going to be shooting around 10 to 11 threes, around 37 to 39% going forward.
I don't know. Like 38%, and he was shooting 8 pull-up threes a game last year.
Yeah.
That's a tough bar to maintain. And obviously that's never happened before. He has had postseasons like 2021, for example, where he shot 11 threes a game at 41%, but it is only a 7-game sample. And everything outside of that is more in line with what you'd expect from Luka. 36% on 7 attempts, 34% on 10 attempts, 32% last year on 9.5 attempts. And in the regular season, he has hovered around 35% for the last 5 years, excluding last season. And then you look at like the other indicators like free throw shooting and mid-range shooting, they haven't really taken meaningful jumps since Luka's second year. So like it's hard for me to like really say if he made a major improvement in that regard. But like I do think Luka is a really good shooter.
Yeah.
So then it comes down to how good of a shooter is he? 38% on 8 pull-up threes a game is like a top 5 shooter in the league from 3. I don't think Luke is that good. So I think he's probably more in line with like you said, 36, 37 than he is at 38 on that volume. But I do think Luka is still an elite shooter, and I think he obviously gets treated as one. So I don't think the difference in 1 or 2% is really going to affect how defenses treat him. I think it just comes down to how much more efficient he can be. And especially when he's getting to the rim way less than ever, being able to make threes at a high clip is something that's extremely valuable. I wouldn't buy stock in 10 threes a game at 38% as an indicator of who Luka Doncic is what I'm saying. So I guess I am saying it's more of an anomaly than who he is what I'm saying. But I also think he's an elite shooter. So I don't think it's a bad thing that he had an outlier shooting season. I'm not comparing it to like Julius Randle shooting 40% in 2021, for example. That's basically what I would say. That's basically my take on it. Yeah. The next take, I'm gonna butcher this name. Hjalmar Skeets Nielsen. If I got that wrong, I apologize, but I think I did my best. This is definitely the hottest take of the episode. Reggie Miller is a better scorer than Allen Iverson.
And you know what? I don't think I have the guts to make this argument, but I can see it depends on what you necessarily he's actually in the chat. He said you got it right. So that's great.
Thank you.
I think it depends on what you value. Reggie Miller is one of the best off-ball movers in the NBA or in NBA history. The way he was able to constantly generate an open shot and be one of the best shooters in the league, if that's what you value, then I can understand wanting to take Reggie Miller because he's going to always create an open shot for himself. But the thing that you could take for the thing that you can look at the downside for it is he doesn't necessarily do it with the ball in his hand. So you're going to have somebody else next to him to necessarily find him when he is getting these open shots, whether it's just a sliver of room or just a small pocket to where he does have that open shot. You're going to have somebody next to him to really get him the ball. As for Allen Iverson, I think his relentlessness, the ball handle, the finishing around the rim was extremely underrated. The shooting, I wouldn't necessarily take Allen Iverson. I just think a lot of people, they may overthink Allen Iverson as a scorer because there wasn't the best spacing around him. He just did not have the best offensive situation in those years in Philly. So maybe it doesn't look as good as it would now, but I would still have to go AI as the better scorer.
I mean, I think we all understand why the argument for Reggie Miller exists. It's obviously an efficiency thing.
Yeah.
And also Reggie Miller is one of the better playoff risers. I'm very aware of the numbers, but I'm gonna go straight to the AI efficiency because that is the elephant in the room. In AI came into the league at negative 2.3 relative true shooting. His sophomore year, he was at plus 1.1. Then in 99, negative 0.3. In 2000, negative 2.7. In his MVP year, he was a net neutral, plus 0.0. Not 0.1, not negative 0.1, 0.0. Flat on the league average true shooting. Then the following year, negative 3.1, then negative 1.9, then negative 3.8. Then plus 0.3. This is where you get the peak of Allen Iverson efficiency. Plus 0.3, plus 0.8, plus 0.4, plus 2.7. And then you end that off with a negative 4.2 in Allen Iverson's last year where he was a full-time player. And obviously in the playoffs, I will read that out after the fact. Reggie Miller was obviously the much more efficient player. For reference, he came into the league at plus 4, and then followed it up with plus 6.5, plus 11, plus 11.5, plus 10, plus 8, plus 11, plus 7.7, plus 8.3, plus 6.7, plus 9.5, plus 7.9, plus 8, plus 5.6, plus 9.7, plus 7.8, plus 8.4, plus 5.3 in Reggie Miller's regular season career. Now, the volume is where there's no conversation to be had. Allen Iverson is the more voluminous scorer, particularly in the regular season. And I think for me, from a skill set perspective, I think it's similar to what I said about Steph Curry. You've got the guys who can create advantages, but they need someone else to capitalize on it for them. Reggie Miller being the predominant off-ball scorer he still required someone to get him the ball when he did manage to get open coming off 17 screens, which it wasn't the most difficult thing in the world to do. It wasn't difficult for Mark Jackson to find Reggie Miller when he was wide open or when he came off a call at the free throw line. It wasn't difficult, but you need someone to do that. Allen Iverson was able to generate his own offense out in a way that Reggie Miller couldn't. But I also would be remiss if I didn't mention that Allen Iverson, in his own right, was one of the best off-ball players in the NBA at the time. A lot of his offense came away from the basketball, and that's why he moved from point guard to shooting guard because why am I blanking on the coach's name?
For the Sixers?
Yes, why am I blanking on his name?
I completely botched it. Hold on.
Why am I blanking on his name? Larry Brown. Thank you. Larry Brown. I don't know why I just blanked. Because Larry Brown didn't think he was capable of running an offense. Thank you. I don't know why I just blanked. So he also was a predominant off-ball player. And then I think you factor in Reggie Miller was obviously the better shooter. And Reggie Miller in the playoffs in particular was able to elevate his scoring to a level that matched a lot of all-time greats. If you look at Reggie Miller in his peak in the postseason, So I'll say 94 and 95 are probably the two postseasons in which you can point to that are consecutive, where it's like Reggie Miller was at his best. In the 94 postseason, Reggie Miller averaged 28.7 points per 75 on plus 7.2 relative true shooting. And he followed that up by, in the 95 postseason, averaging 29.1 points per 75 on plus 10.5 relative true shooting. Allen Iverson never came close to matching any efficiency numbers like that. Now, the volume was always there. His first postseason appearance, 29 points per 75, followed by 26, 31.2, 32.3, 31.4, 29.2, and then the Denver years where it was a lot lower, 23.1 and 23.9. The issue is the efficiency was negative 2.6, negative 4, negative 3.6, which I believe is in 2001. Yes, negative 3.6 in 2001, plus 0.0 in 2002, negative 1 in 2003. Is that 2003? Yes. And then his next postseason in 05 is where he peaked. It was a Pistons series. Go watch that if you haven't. Where he was 29.2 points per 75 and plus 5.8. So the efficiency always favored Reggie Miller. And then in the postseason, the volume relatively stacked up, albeit for a short period of time. So that's the argument. But for me, I do think the self-generation is something that has to be weighed in here. But at the same time, teams couldn't take away what Reggie Miller was doing. So it's not like, oh, when they forced the ball into Reggie Miller's hands, he couldn't do anything. It's like, A, you couldn't force the ball into Reggie Miller's hands. Like, you couldn't force Reggie Miller to start isolating because he was just so good at creating separation for himself off the ball. And he was such a good shooter, so you provide that value in a way that Allen Iverson couldn't, because Allen Iverson was, for all intents and purposes, not a very good shooter, despite the fact he shot a bunch of shots. The more I think about it, the more I'm starting to understand it. I don't know if I agree.
That's why
I don't know if I agree, but the more I look into it, the more I'm starting to understand it. The issue with Reggie, I think, also can be some sort of sample size. Like, looking at the numbers again, in 1992, he averaged 24.6 points per 75 in the playoffs on plus 21 relative true shooting. The issue is he only played 130 minutes in the postseason, so it's just a very small sample. But then I compare that to like Allen Iverson. It's like, well, his sample wasn't much bigger. Like in a lot of these postseasons, it's around 200 minutes. So I'm gonna leave the answer of I don't know, but I understand why Reggie Miller has a horse in this race from a statistical standpoint. But I also think from just a eye test standpoint, there is also something to be said about the value of off-ball scoring in a way that it doesn't really get brought up unless your name is Steph Curry. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. I apologize.
When I first started, I was like, I don't know if I have the guts to really make that argument, but I really understand. I really understand it.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I very, very much understand it to the point where I probably am more inclined to agree than disagree, but I don't know confidently enough to say that I agree. So
I'm gonna do my homework on that.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you didn't get the answer you were looking for, but that's the best I can do for you. We've got a Dallas fan here named Sakul. Said Dirk is one of the most underrated offensive weapons ever. Him being labeled as just a shooter and playoff dropper are false. Also, he said Dub HoopTalk, Dub Show. Thank you.
Appreciate it, man.
What's your thoughts on Dirk as an offensive weapon?
One of the greatest there is. There's not a lot of guys who stand at 7 feet, can back you down in the post and go to a shot that's almost uncontestable, with his one-legged fadeaways and the underrated ability he had to put the ball on the floor, play off ball. There was moments where he was coming off pin downs when he was playing with Steve Nash, just the pure versatility inside the arc and at times being able to stretch out to beyond the arc. Like, he was extremely efficient, playing around the basket, getting to the basket with the ball on the floor, playing off ball, playing in the post. Dirk is one of the best offensive weapons there is.
I agree. I think a lot of it is because of the era in which he played, in the sense that he was the best stretch four in an era where bigs were still programmed to protect the rim. He offered just a matchup nightmare in that regard. You'll see Dirk was a power forward who teams often put wings on because the bigs just couldn't keep up with him, and that comes back to the fluidity and mobility he had. Especially like a really young early 2000s Dirk who actually shot more threes, which is interesting because the older he got, the less threes he shot. Not talking about like the old washed up version of Dirk. I mean, like
2015.
The prime Dirk, he shot less threes than he did in like the early 2000s, which I do find quite interesting. It's almost as if like he knew what he was best at and stuck to it, which I think is a lesson a lot of people should learn. But what made Dirk so special is that he wasn't a good passer by any stretch of the imagination. He could make basic kick out reads, and he could play out of a double team, and he could find the open guy off the double team, and then other people swing it around and get open shots. That's what made Jason Kidd so special with Dallas, is because he could move the ball so quick that off of Dirk's advantage, Jason Kidd could find the actual open man in a way that Dirk just couldn't or wouldn't. But as a scorer, he was such a dangerous weapon because it was something that you hadn't really seen before. And then when teams started putting wings on him, you could have some success. Like the go-to is obviously that 07 series against the Warriors. They played so small and so fast. And Dirk at that point was just not consistently able to punish mismatches in the way that he was able to in the subsequent years, which is why I always say I think Dirk peaked from like 08, 09, 2010, 2011, as opposed to like 05, 06, 07. Because I do think when he got stronger and sturdier and was better in the post, that's when he peaked. But when you get to that point from 08, 09, 2010, and 2011, Dirk averaged in the postseason 27 points per 75 on +5, 28 on +10.5, 29 on +12, and then 31 on +8. That 4-year stretch is some of the best postseason scoring we've ever seen, statistically. And then you watch him play and you realize they're either Dirk misses or he makes the shot. It's not, oh, that was good defense and you made him miss. It was either Dirk missed or he made the shot. And he was so good at getting to the line and drawing contact, especially when he became more jump shot reliant. He was still able to get to the line. In the 08 playoffs, albeit a 5-game sample, he averaged 10 free throws a game. In 09, 9 free throws a game. In 2010, 7 free throws a game. In 2011, 9 free throws a game. In the 2012 playoffs, it was still 10.5 free throws a game. And Dirk very rarely missed from the line as well. So you're getting 8 points a game from free throws. Then you've got one of the best mid-range scorers of all time, one of the best post scorers of all time, and he's a mismatch problem everywhere you go. He's a large part of the reason why Dallas have some of the best offenses of all time. The 04 Dallas Mavericks are statistically the best offense ever. Now, it's a tiny bit skewed because they ended up playing Dirk Nowitzki at the 5 that year. So Don Nelson was kind of skewing things. Like he sacrificed defense completely and went all offense, which is why they ended up losing in the first round to the Kings, I believe, that year, because their defense was just horrific. But even just outside of that, the Dallas Mavericks were routinely up at the top of the league in offense. Now, they didn't beat the Suns in most of those years. In 06, I know they had the best offense in the league, but they were always in and around the top 2, top 3. It was them and Phoenix in the top 2 of offense for the most part. And that was a large part because of what Dirk Nowitzki provided as a matchup. So, yes, I do agree. Dirk Nowitzki is one of the most underrated offensive weapons. And I think the reason he gets underrated so much as an offensive weapon is because a lot of people have the tendency to believe that if you aren't averaging a lot of points and averaging a lot of assists, you're just a scorer. And I think like the label of being just a something is extremely disingenuous, because like someone can provide value in multiple ways and still be less valuable than someone who provides value in mainly one way. And I think Dirk is like the epitome of that. His scoring was so valuable that it outweighed a lot of people who are high volume scorers and playmakers. So that's what I think made Dirk so special, is that he could match the dual threats pretty much solely with scoring offensively, that is. So yes, I agree with you. Dirk Nowitzki is special, and Dirk Nowitzki is extremely underrated in general. But then like that one finals run, all of a sudden like people like overrate him in that sense, in my opinion. But that's a whole different conversation. Yeah. We have, I want to say 10 more super chats to get through. So to anyone who was on the community tab, I apologize.
Sorry. Yeah,
but
that might be this looks like it's doing really well. So if this does happen again, maybe we'll just do.
Yeah, but if this does happen again, it might have to be a super chat only show. But then I say that, and then no one will send super chats next week.
So, so still rock with the community.
We'll see. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But NP13 said basketball has evolved to a point where playmaking for tier 1 players has lacked individual defense in the hierarchy of values and as a prerequisite to establish yourself in that tier and sustain. I'm gonna read that again because I need to understand it some more.
Yeah.
Basketball has evolved to a point where playmaking for tier one players has lacked individual defense in the hierarchy of values and as a prerequisite to establish yourself in that tier and sustain. So, correct me if I'm wrong, MP13, if you're still in the chat. You are saying individual playmaking is more important for individual players than individual defenses. And you're also saying in order to be in the tier one of players, you have to provide very strong or elite playmaking value. Otherwise, you can't enter that tier one of players. For current standards, for example, that Jokic, that Giannis, that SGA Luka tier, for example. Is that what you are saying? Because I don't want to start rambling on and I misunderstood the take. So MP13, if you could get back to me as soon as possible, that'd be great. But assuming that is what he's saying before he gets back to us, what's your thoughts on that, John B?
I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I definitely think that if you want to be better and if you want to put yourself into these conversations of being one of the best players in the league, you can't just be one-dimensional unless that is one of like the most dominant traits that we've seen in the entire NBA or in the history of the NBA. But if we all do look at dominant players in the NBA, we look at Jokic's scoring and playmaking. We look at Luka's scoring and playmaking. We look at Giannis's defensive years on top of his playmaking getting better and being a dominant player around the rim. We look at SGA being able to drive to the rim so efficiently and be a pull-up mid-range shooter on top of him being a solid defender, a solid team defender, solid one-on-one defender, and him being an extremely underrated playmaker. But I don't necessarily think that's the end-all be-all. I don't think that all great players have to be elite offensive players and elite playmakers. We have guys like Evan Mobley, who a lot of people would say is a top three defender in the league. Now that he's become an above average offensive player, a lot of people are raving about what he can become. Victor Wembanyama came in as a defensive prospect who had a lot of signs offensively. So when we look at those type of things, I don't think it necessarily just dies on scoring and playmaking. I think if you can be an elite two-way player, I think that skyrockets a lot. Kawhi Leonard was never the best playmaker. He was always a great two-way player, and that's what put him in those conversations. So I think when you value just being able to be valuable in multiple positions, I think that's what puts you in these conversations instead of being one-dimensional.
I just want, before I answer, he clarified. He said, "Yeah, it's that." So clarifying on what I said, but I'm saying playmaking is trending towards overwhelmingly dominating what's required to reach tier one. I would venture to say that's always been the case, but I think now people are starting to recognize it. I think for the most part, it seemed to be if you can score and you're an elite defender, that's how you enter the conversations of the best player in the world. But I think what gets lost in that is scoring and playmaking are so intertwined.
Yeah.
That I think it becomes extremely difficult to pass out what's what. For example, Jokic is such a good scorer that he should demand more double teams than he receives. But he's such a good playmaker that he can dissect double teams in a way that leaves teams reluctant to double team him. So does that make him a better? So in turn, because of how good of a playmaker he is, it makes him a more efficient scorer. Someone could be just as dominant as a post scorer as Jokic is, but you would just double team that guy. And if they can't dissect a double team in the same way that Jokic can, all of a sudden they are worse as a scorer because their efficiency would drop because they would end up shooting into those double teams when Jokic wouldn't. And the reverse is also true. Someone could be an excellent passer and get the ball through tight windows and make reads for people, but they will struggle to create advantages because what creates advantages is having a numbers advantage. Typically, there's other ways to create advantage, but anytime you can create a numbers advantage, that's the easiest advantage to create. And you normally create numbers advantages by being the most dangerous person on the floor. And the most dangerous person for a defense is the one who can score. Because at the end of the day, if you're not a threat to score, we don't have to overreact to you. And that's what caused guys like Rajon Rondo to have problems in terms of how good of a playmaker were they. Because if you aren't forcing defenses into rotation, or you aren't shrinking the floor on yourself to create easier passing lanes, how valuable is your playmaking compared to someone who may be a worse passer than you, but is able to just create cleaner passing angles because of their threat to score? And that's where, like, my issue with just like, this guy's a better scorer, this guy's a better playmaker, they're so connected that I find it very hard to distinguish between which is which. Kobe Bryant drew more double teams than a lot of people, in large part because of how dangerous of a scorer he was, but also because teams are aware of sometimes his unwillingness to pass out of those shots.
Yeah.
Does that make Kobe Bryant a worse scorer? Not necessarily, but it made his scoring worse because it hurt his efficiency. And that's where I struggle. So I do think you've always needed playmaking value in some way to get to that tier one. For example, I think Hakeem elevated once he got Rudy Tomjanovich. He got floor spacing around him. And Hakeem, I think, has spoke to this, that he struggled trusting his teammates early on. But once he was able to trust his teammates, then he was able to make those kick-out reads out of double teams in the post, and it made the offense better, and it made him better because now teams were more reluctant to send double teams to him, which made his scoring easier. So I think playmaking has always been a prerequisite to enter the tier one of players. I think people just didn't acknowledge it to be so until you get the best players averaging a high number of assists. Hakeem is averaging 2-3 assists a game, so it doesn't get acknowledged as the fact that he was a great playmaker once he entered that tier one. Shaq was averaging like 3 assists a game, so it doesn't get mentioned the fact that what made him so dominant offensively was that he was a quick decision maker once those doubles came, and he was able to play make for his teammates. Steph Curry was like the one that kind of changed this mode because he wasn't averaging a lot of assists, and people kind of had to like rationalize why their offense was so successful without Steph Curry being like this dual threat point guard in terms of scoring and playmaking. So then it led to people like, well, his off-ball value is what's changing the game and it's creating open shots for people. So he got the credit for it, not because people recognize the value of playmaking, but because they couldn't recognize by the box score why Steph Curry was as impactful as like the results were suggesting. So it happens by accident, but at least we got to the right answer at the end of the day. So we'll take it how we can get it. And I think the reverse is also true. Like, Steve Nash wasn't a high volume scorer, but teams guarded him like he was. So he didn't need to score 25 because teams treated him like he was scoring 25, even when he was scoring 16. And that threat he had to score is what created layups for his teammates in a different way to, like, for example, and this is not to bash John Stockton, who was averaging like 17 and 14, which is like more assists than Steve Nash ever did, and like right in line with Steve Nash's career high in terms of points per game. But teams didn't treat John Stockton like he was a threat to score in the same way they did Steve Nash. Yeah. So despite the fact the box scores looked eerily similar, and in fact, I think most box score metrics favor John Stockton, the way teams treated them was drastically different. And that's why the results in terms of the team offense were also drastically different, in my opinion. And that's also why I think the Jazz offense skyrocketed when John Stockton was less involved, because number 32 became a much better passer later on in his career in the mid to late 90s. And when he peaked as a passer and a playmaker, the offense skyrocketed. You see that trend consistently for a lot of teams. When their best player, or the one who gets the most attention, elevates as a playmaker, the offense is improved. I think that's what's next for a guy like Anthony Edwards. When he elevates as a playmaker, now in this situation, I don't know how.
Yeah, he's going to have to.
But like with the right personnel, and when he elevates as a playmaker, I think that's when you see the Timberwolves offense will start to peak. So I always think playmaking has always been the prerequisite to enter that tier one, especially as an offensive player. It's just, I think now people are starting to realize that's the case. But if you go back through our history, I think it's always been true. Yeah, because people didn't acknowledge it or weren't aware of it.
Because we start to see it on the biggest stages. For example, Jayson Tatum, one of the reasons he struggled in 2022 is because they were blitzing him. They were getting the ball out of his hands as much as possible. And people were saying Jaylen Brown played better than Jayson Tatum. It's just because Jaylen Brown had the ball more and they let Jaylen Brown go one-on-one more. Jayson Tatum did not have the progression to really become that playmaker that he needed to be. And he did it in the 2024 NBA Finals, and it looked a lot better. For the person in the comments saying, so Tatum's a tier 1 now, did not say that. Just saying as an example.
But he might be, who knows? But that's not the point of what we were just
Yeah, it was not the point at all.
Yeah. The next one is from Mosnef, who is in the chat, and he asked me a question about is my point that you can't separate playmaking from scoring value. My point is you can't separate them entirely. You can separate like parts of it, like passing is always going to be passing, but at the same time, it's like if you draw a double team, the passing window becomes wider because someone is inevitably wide open. But then the pass is also more difficult because you're playing in a crowd. So like you can't separate it entirely, but you can separate parts of it, is what I'm saying. But his actual super chat regarding his take is asking, what do you think the chances are that JT retires greater than Luka, Giannis, Kobe? I'm going to ask you, A, how high do you think JT can go in terms of the pantheon of all-time greats? And then I'll ask, do you think he can get above those guys? So it's two different questions. How high can JT go, and can he go higher than those guys did?
I really like Jayson Tatum. I really do. And I just don't think that he has the level of impact that some of these all-time greats have really provided for their teams. Now, that's not me saying that he isn't impactful. Don't get me wrong. That's not me saying he's impactful. But I just don't think that he was impactful to the level of people that we have ahead of him. I don't think he was as impactful as Steph or Kevin Durant or Nikola Jokic or Tim Duncan or Hakeem Olajuwon. So if we look towards the end of Jayson Tatum's career, and I believe that he's probably going to get 1 or 2 more championships. I believe it. I believe that it will happen. But I just don't think that he provided a level of value as some of these all-time greats have. And when I look at some of the value, I just don't think there's something that JT goes to relentlessly that can't be stopped like some of these all-time greats do. I think Giannis has that. I think Kobe has that. I think Luka has that. I think Jokic has it. I think Shea has it. I think Wemby's going to get it. So it's just, when I look at all-time greats, I look at the value that they provide and how valuable it is for their team. And I just don't think Jayson Tatum can match what their values and what they bring night to night.
I'm kind of on the different side of the fence to you here. I don't think Jayson Tatum will ever peak as high as guys like Kobe and like those all-time greats that we're talking about in the top 15 of NBA history. I don't think he'll ever peak that high. But I think he's only 26. And I think people forget that because of how much he's done already. He's already played more playoff games than Giannis has. Like, substantially. He's played over 30 more playoff games than Giannis has. And it doesn't look like that's slowing down anytime soon. In the last 5 postseasons, he's averaging over 26 in every single one of them. I want to say he's already scored more points in the postseason than guys like Kevin Garnett, who I know aren't like all-time dominant postseason scorers, but he's 26. So I think the longevity is where I think Jayson Tatum can catch up to a lot of guys, where it's like, sure, at their best, I would rather have player A over Jayson Tatum. But if player A gives me 7 years and Jayson Tatum gives me 12, at the end of the day, 5 extra years of a slightly inferior player is probably still more valuable than the 7 years of the slightly superior player. And that's without me even mentioning that Jayson Tatum in his own right is still an elite player. He is an elite wing defender. And in my opinion, he's not struggles. He gets discredited as a defender, in my opinion, because he isn't an elite on-ball defender. And this goes back to my whole spiel about like how a lot of people only watch the ball. I would call Jayson Tatum a solid on-ball defender. So nothing special on that side of the ball. He wouldn't make an all-defensive team because of his ability to lock down other wings, in my opinion. But he's so good away from the ball. He's very good at the nail. He's very good in passing lanes. He's very good at playing 2 on the weak side, allowing the Boston Celtics zone to operate in the way it does because Jayson Tatum is able to zone up the weak side single-handedly. He's very dangerous one pass away. And just his length just deters a lot of drives when he's able to dig at the ball and make ball handlers pick up their dribble early. And then he can be a primary when you shrink the floor around him because of his length and his ability to contest shots well. And then you got the utility he provides in terms of his ability to match up with not dominant fives,
I
but
get it.
legitimate fives, rim rollers, and
Daniel
those types. That extra utility is also extremely valuable, especially when you look at the scheme in which he's in right now. So I think he gets underrated defensively. As a scorer, there's extreme volatility, particularly with his shot diet. He is going to shoot a lot of threes, and he's not the best pull-up three-point shooter. But the highs of Jayson Tatum are also some of the highest we've ever seen. I do think he has the record for most points in a game 7.
53 against Philly.
51 against Philly, whatever it was. And he's able to single-handedly win you games and series when his shot's going down. But especially now, maybe the last season or two, where he's really improved as a playmaker, going back to MP13 Super Chat. He is an elite offensive player as well. He's one of the very few guys who I would say are, for their position, elite on both sides of the ball. That doesn't mean he's the best offensive player at his position. It doesn't mean he's the best defensive player in his position. But he's one of the very few who match both sides of the ball in similar value. He's not a 90-10 superstar. He's not an 80-20 superstar. He's like a 58-42 superstar in favor of offense. Like, I think there's a credit to that. And I think his portability and his ability to play with a multitude of people is something that will be recognized. I know a lot of people discredit him because the Celtics are so good. But being able to play with high-level talent is not something that anyone can do. It's not just put this guy on the team instead of Jayson Tatum and they'll be just as good. It's not easy to play next to
I've
great
seen
players.
that. Oh, my God. I've seen those. It's awful.
Yeah, like, a lot of people give a lot of credit to people who are able to carry bum rosters to mediocre heights. And that's not something anyone can do. You can't just put anyone on a bad team and they'll make you solid. They'll make you a playoff team or a playing team. That's true. But those players who are really good at the floor raising part of it, that doesn't mean that automatically if you put them on a really good team, they still have that same value. And this goes back to like, what's his value and how important is making a bad team solid versus making a good team great. And I think Jayson Tatum is one of the best ceiling raisers in the NBA because of his versatile skill set. You don't really have any redundancy with Jayson Tatum. If your team's missing playmaking from the wing, Jayson Tatum can provide that. But if you have playmaking from the wing, you have an elite spot-up shooter in Jayson Tatum. We have someone who can drive off closeouts of other people's gravity, but then you also have someone who's so dangerous downhill himself that he creates his own gravity. And then defensively, he's so good away from the ball that he can play into any scheme defensively. So you don't really have to build a scheme to hide Jayson Tatum's flaws. In fact, you can build a team around your second best player's strengths and flaws, and Jayson Tatum will still ultimately be the most impactful player because of how good he is. Boston, in my opinion, are more catered to Jaylen Brown's strengths and weaknesses than Jayson Tatum's. And Jayson Tatum, in my opinion, is still their most valuable and best player. You give the guy with the weaker handle more spacing. You give the guy who's not the best off-ball defender a bunch of great off-ball defenders so he can be at his best as an on-ball defender. You give the guy who's not the best playmaker the widest passing angles in the NBA. And you give someone who's not the greatest rebounder. You give someone who's not the greatest rebounder free reign to leak out in transition where he's at his best because you have a guy on the wing who can get you 10 rebounds a game and who can battle with bigs. The team is built for Jaylen Brown's strengths and to hide his weaknesses more so than Jayson Tatum. But Jayson Tatum is still able to be the most impactful and be as great as he is. And I think that's a testament to how good he is. And I think that's something that gets missed in the conversation about Jayson Tatum. So I think that's his avenue to being an all-time great. I think that's his avenue to being in the top 20, top 25 conversations, wherever he ends up, is how good he was for how long and how valuable he is to winning and how valuable he is to success. And that's not me saying he's going to win 7 championships. That's me saying that I find it very hard to believe Jayson Tatum will be on a bad team because he does so many things that help winning. So that's my take on it. I don't know about Luka, Giannis, and Kobe. If I had to bet, I would say he probably finishes below Giannis and Kobe, and Luka's to be determined. But I do think Jayson Tatum is very underrated in terms of how good he actually is. So thank you for the chat, Mosby.
Yeah, that was a really nice conversation.
We've got one from Ray that we've kind of alluded to this, so I don't think we will spend too long on this. No disrespect, Ray. But he said Steph versus KD, which player provides a higher ceiling? What's your thoughts?
I'm gonna go Kevin Durant. I think you alluded to it earlier. I think he's just a little bit more portable, and I think he's a better defender to where you can put him in your offense and put him in your defense. You don't necessarily have to adjust either way. So I'm gonna go KD.
I'm gonna go Steph. And I think I do agree, like I said, because it was my point about the portability and stuff. I do think that's what makes you. I think Kevin Durant in more random situations will get you to the playoffs and probably generate deeper postseason runs on average. But I think if you fully maximize both of them, I think the ceiling of the team with Steph Curry on it is probably higher. And the reason I think that is because it's hard to explain, but when you're as good off the ball as Steph Curry and you're as good on the ball as Steph Curry, if you fully maximize that, you have someone who's able to bring value in ways that kind of exceeds maximum value, if that makes sense. Like we spoke about earlier with the playmaking thing. Teams gear up towards the most dangerous person, and the most dangerous person is the one who's the biggest threat to score. Usually the most dangerous person and the biggest threat to score is usually the one with the ball. So teams will load up to the ball side. If you have Kobe Bryant on the wing, for example, they'll load up because Kobe Bryant's the most dangerous. With Steph Curry, when he has the ball, he's the most dangerous. And when he doesn't have the ball, he's the most dangerous. So you end up having this situation where the defense is slanted away from the ball because of Steph Curry. And you practically have two equal threats. The guy with the ball, who's now being guarded like they aren't as big of a threat. And then you have Steph Curry, who's taking the attention as if he has the ball. So it's like you have a numbers advantage because it's like you're practically guarding two basketballs, is the best way I can explain it. The actual ball and the threat of Steph Curry potentially getting the ball. So you're practically playing defense on both sides as if there's two basketballs on the court. And I just don't think anyone really has matched that level of ceiling. And I think that's why I think offensively in particular, I think Steph probably has the highest ceiling in history offensively. I just think the attainability of that ceiling is what's more questionable. I think the ceiling of KD is more attainable, but the ceiling of Steph is higher. And then it comes down to what do you prefer, the higher ceiling or the one that probably isn't as high, but is easier to build and easier to actually reach. So would you rather go to the moon or would you rather go to the stars? The stars are higher, but one's a lot more achievable. That's why I don't know. That's a philosophical question, I guess. Jay the Reaper. The floor of a player is more important. Oh, okay. There you go. The floor of a player is more important than the ceiling of a player because the most valuable traits in a player is consistency. So what they provide at the bare minimum means more than what they can provide at their peak is, I presume, the rest of that. What's your thoughts on that? Floor over ceiling?
I am a guy who does a lot of draft analysis. And when I look at some of the prospects coming into the draft, I always value their floor a lot more than their ceiling because in the end of the day, the floor is a little bit more obtainable than the ceiling. So when I look at, for example, there's been a lot of discourse of Dylan Harper being the number one pick over Cooper Flagg. I look at Cooper Flagg's floor and I think that his floor is just a little higher walking into the NBA because I think his traits can pass over to the NBA a little bit more. The defense, the rebounding, more than Dylan Harper's mid-range scoring and his ball handling around the mid-range. So I do value floor just a little bit more than ceiling because a lot of things have to go right for a player to reach their ceiling, and they have to be in a really favorable situation for them to reach their ceiling. So I value the floor a little bit more. That's not saying that I completely disregard the ceiling, but I value floor just a little bit more.
I used to be on the opposite side. I'm speaking on the draft and then I'll speak in general. On the draft, I used to be player A's ceiling is higher, take him because the high end outcome, the benefit is you end up with a player who can be a top 5 player in the league. Despite the fact that the floor is someone who is a rotation player versus this guy who will at worst be a starter and at best be an all-star, the guy with the higher ceiling, I think you invest the development in him. And if it doesn't work out, cool. I've since changed my mind on that. A, since player development is just not easy. It's not easy to develop someone. And B, because I think the ceiling is just a lot more unattainable than I think people give it credit for. Someone being at their maximum ability or capability is not something that happens very often. Like even the all-time greats, like we hear it with Shaq all the time. Like Shaq could have been better. But like there's a lot of guys who are all-time greats who I don't think actually reached their ceiling. They just got to such a high level that if you say, well, I think they could have been better, it comes off as hate. But like in the general sense, I think if you can, I'm going to use the box score to illustrate the point because I think that's the easiest way to do it. But hopefully people understand it. It goes beyond the box score, but this is the most basic way I can explain it. Player A in a playoff series scores 30 every game. So 7-game series, he scores 30, 30, 30, 30, 30. Player B will score 40 one night, 20 the next night, then he'll score 50, then he'll score 17, then he'll score 6, then he'll score 38, and I think that's 6 games, and then he'll close out the series with 25. I haven't done the calculations. Player B might average more points. But the inconsistency and the unreliability is something that can win/lose you a series. It comes down, it's like Jalen Green. Jalen Green is actually
literally thought of him, but
Jalen Green is actually the perfect example for this. The ceiling of Jalen Green is extremely high as a scorer. We've seen it in the last 8 games prior to the Detroit game. He won Player of the Week. He was averaging 30 a game. He was shooting 40+% from 3. He was extremely efficient. And the Rockets went 6-2 in those games. The issue is he also is liable to lose you games because he will shoot you out of a game or he'll just not be very impactful. And I think over the course of a season, like 82 games, I think the floor is more important. You want someone who you can rely on, similar to like an SGA, for example. The floor of SGA is extremely high. So you want someone you can rely on more consistently. But once you get to a playoff series where the sample size is smaller, I think it's arguable that the person who can explode on any given night and win you a game single-handedly, when you only need to win 4 in a series, and you have someone who can win you a game with their ceiling, I think that could be more valuable. But over the course of 82 games where you need consistency, I think the floor is more important. But if you have someone in the playoffs who can win you a game or 2 in a series by themselves, now they could lose you a game. So then you're now playing, you're flipping a coin, you're playing chess. But I do think when the sample size is smaller, I do think the possibility for a higher ceiling is something that can't be quantified. Now, I do think as that being your primary source of offense or just primary source from a player, you probably don't want that. I think for like your best player, you probably want the more steady floor. But for your second or third best player, I think the higher ceiling is probably more valuable than the higher floor. I'd rather have someone who on any given night as my second or third best player can win me a game, as opposed to someone as my second or third best player who I know is going to give me a solid baseline every night. Personally, that doesn't mean I'm right. I just think that's probably just my perspective on it. Because in the playoffs, I think having anyone who has the ability to win you a game when you only need 4 is extremely valuable. So that's probably my take on that. So in a regular season, I'll value floor over ceiling. And for my best player, I'll value floor over ceiling. But in the postseason and for my second or third best player, I'll value ceiling over floor. That's probably my take on that. We've got a few more, quite a few more actually. So we'll see how long this takes. Carlos Hernandez. What did you guys think about the Scottie Pippen take on Gil's Arena about whether he's a better second option or if he could run his own team? I don't know the take, but I guess you're asking, I'm not going to just ignore your chat. So we're going to frame it the only way I can, because I don't know the actual take. Do you think, John, that Scottie Pippen could run his own team, or was he better as a second option?
I think he was way better as a second option. Like, I don't think he could create to the level of a first option consistently for years to build like a continuity for a team to be a consistent number 1 option. I just think he was better next to a better player.
I think the view of first options and second option, I think is kind of getting outdated. I think Scottie Pippen couldn't be your best scorer on a team that has an elite offense, especially in the postseason. I don't think that could be the case. But I do think Scottie Pippen could probably be your best player on a team that wins. I just think you'd probably need a better scorer than him. Now, who that scorer would be, I don't know. Maybe it's a prime Reggie Miller.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
For the 2000 Trailblazers, would you consider him or Rasheed the best player?
I'd say Rasheed was the best player.
Yeah, I think Rasheed was like 19 a game, All-Star year. But Scottie still had it defensively. He still had it.
Mm-hmm. That 2000 Portland Trailblazers team is actually just a very underrated team that probably could have gone to the finals that year if they just won that game 7. What they blew like a 10-point lead in the fourth or whatever it was. So it's tough. But I think Scottie Pippen probably could be your best player on a team that could make deep postseason runs, could win a championship. But I think as a second option, I mean, as you saw, like you end up, I think you could build a dynasty with Scottie Pippen as your second best player. Because with Scottie Pippen as your second best player, you're in a league where there's like maybe 7 guys better than him. So if Scottie Pippen's your second best player, that means you have one of the top 6, which means you're probably in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
So that's probably my thoughts on that. I think Scottie Pippen, if you want to win more, ideally Scottie Pippen's your second best player. But realistically, having one of the top 7-ish players in the league on your team as the second best player is just not very likely most of the time. So I think if Scottie Pippen is your best player, you can win. I think he just needs someone who's a better scorer than him, particularly in the half court. So, and that guy will probably end up getting more credit than Scottie Pippen because, scoring just has such a heavy bias towards people. But Scottie Pippen will be probably your best playmaker, you're probably your best passer, and probably your best defender on that team with all the versatility and stuff and the transition play and all of that, while also being able to score at a good level himself. So I think Scottie would probably be your best player. It's just you're not going to probably rattle off 2 3-peats. So for Scottie Pippen's success, him being next to MJ and on that Bulls team probably led to more team success than he would have had by himself. But in terms of his ability as an individual, I do think there was pathways to success, pathways to winning, pathways to being consistently in contention that were explorable if he had that opportunity. So that's my thoughts on that. Blade, £4, so he's from the UK. Hakeem would have been just as good as MJ if he had a competent second option from 84 to 97. Was the best defender while being top 5 to 10 offensively. What's your thoughts?
I don't necessarily think that having a better team is what makes the better player. Now, I do think Hakeem Olajuwon, once again, probably the best defender in his era. And he was a really good offensive player, just the work around the mid-range and him having a fantastic face-up game and just working out of the post. But I don't know, it's really hard to put him next to Michael Jordan. I don't think I could do that. I don't think I can do that.
Yeah, I just don't agree. I don't think Hakeem winning more would make him just as good as Michael Jordan. That's just my thought on the accolades and stuff. I also just think, although he was the best defender of that era, and I think by year 2 or 3, he probably was the best defender in the league, although Mark Eaton was just anchoring elite defenses. But in terms of like defensive skill set, I would say it was Hakeem. But just like defensive impact, it probably was Mark Eaton at that time. But just in general, one of the 3 best defenders in the league, was still one of the elite post scorers at the time. Hakeem, in my opinion, didn't become an elite offensive player until like 1993. Like before that, he was a very good offensive player, a very good scorer who was a very bad playmaker, a very bad decision maker. And I think that overall hurt his offenses in a lot of the time. So where like he was a good offensive player because of his isolation scoring, because of his shot making. I don't think until he really was able to leverage his scoring and improve as a playmaker, we'll come back to that MP13 super chat again. I don't think he was an elite offensive player. I definitely, like off the top of my head, I don't think he was a top 5 or 10 offensive player in that time. I think the only time he had that claim was from like 93 to like 96-ish. So That's where I would disagree. And then when it comes down to if he had a competent second option, yeah, he might win more. But I don't think that means he's better than Jordan. I think Jordan is the best offensive player of that era. Not even close. I think he's one of the 5 best offensive players ever. 5 or 6, similar tier as we spoke about earlier. While being an elite defender from year 3, 84, 85, 85, from year 3 to 98, an elite defender. Now, obviously, he's not a Hakeem level defender, but Hakeem's obviously not an MJ level offensive player. I still do think individual offense outweighed individual defense at that time. And I think there is just a large, substantial offensive gap between the two to where I wouldn't be comfortable saying Hakeem would be better than MJ, especially when you factor in career value. Now, if you go simply peak for peak, so like 93 to like 95 Hakeem, was I throw 95 in there? 93 and 94 Hakeem versus like 89 to 91 MJ. I'm still taking MJ, but I think that's somewhat closer than their whole careers. But even then, I think it's hard. But like we're talking about Michael Jordan. I don't know about that.
Exactly. So it's like
it's hard. I'm trying to find avenues to where like I could kind of see it, but at the end of the day, I'm gonna still say I think MJ was better. I just think it's probably. I think it's just probably not gonna. I just don't think so personally. Jose Garcia just said, "What's up? Good take.
What's up, Jose?
What's up? We having fun. I'm gonna let you in a little secret. The plan was for this to be an hour. We're now at nearly an hour and a half.
Yeah, I was thinking about. I'm looking.
It's gonna be longer than the regular Hoop Talk episodes. So I guess.
True.
We've got 8 more right now. We'll see if any more come in. Masenk OG said, "My hot take is D-Wade wasn't a great 3-point shooter, but I feel his shot is underrated and should have won the 2009 MVP. I know I'm biased, and this is crazy. Give me 09 Wade over any Kobe." So you've given us 3 takes here. We're going to address them one by one.
Yeah.
We're going to start with, is D-Wade an underrated shooter? That's what we're going to start with.
I think he was a solid 3-point shooter, but I don't think I wouldn't necessarily say he was a bad shooter, but I wouldn't say he was a great shooter though. I think he was good in the mid-range, but as a 3-point shooter, that wasn't as big as a need back in 2009 as it would be now. So people start to look at, he didn't really stretch the floor well. I mean, he only shot 3-4 threes a game, but I would just say that I think he was a solid mid-range shooter. Wouldn't ask him to shoot any threes, and I wouldn't think he was a bad shooter either.
I would argue that D-Wade is probably more overrated as a shooter than underrated. I think D-Wade had the ability to keep defenses honest with his mid-range shot making. But I think even then, it was a win for defenses when D-Wade shot the ball. And that's not a knock on him. He was just dangerous as a slasher. Like, if I look at it statistically, he was a 43% mid-range shooter in 09, which is really good, especially for the era. Well, really good. It's about average relative to the era. The volume, for example, on mid-range shots in 09 was half of his shot attempts from there. But when you look at like how good he was at the rim, it's like you're living with the shot. And outside of those years, he fell more in line in the low 40s, like high 30s range. That's typically where he was. So, and then as a 3-point shooter, yeah, he just wasn't a good 3-point shooter like at all. And he wasn't the best free throw shooter. Like even that 06 final series where he was taking 200 free throws a game, he still didn't shoot free throws particularly great in that series. Like he's around a 75% free throw shooter, I want to say. So like, I just don't think D-Wade was that good of a shooter. I think what made him so great was how good of a slasher and playmaker he was and how good he was in pick and roll because he was just quicker and able to get to the rim and he was able to reject screens and get baseline and make extremely good passing reads. But as a shooter, that's probably the worst aspect of his game, in my opinion. But then let me just make sure I remember the rest of it. He should have won the 2009 MVP. I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say no.
Yeah, I thought LeBron had that.
Yeah, I think LeBron had one of the best regular seasons of all time. So no disrespect to D-Wade, who I think was the second best performer in the regular season that season. He just happened to come up against one of the 5 best regular seasons I think that's ever been played. Yeah. So unfortunately, I just don't think he's going to stack up to LeBron in that regard. LeBron James in that year, one of the best floor raising seasons, while also being like very clearly an elite ceiling raiser with his off-ball game, with his elite game in transition, with how good of a playmaker he was. Like it's hard to match up to that in my opinion. So that's just unfortunate. And then he followed that up by saying, "Give me 09 Wade over any Kobe year." What's your thoughts?
Over any Kobe year is crazy. Yes. I'm sorry.
Pick a year. What's the best year of Kobe?
I'm just gonna go 06. I'm gonna go 06 Kobe. I just think the impact that he brought every single night with the scoring. And once again, I think it was like, so correct me if I'm wrong. I think Kobe's impact on that team was like night and day, obviously, but they went to like a bottom 5 offense in the NBA with him, without him, and with him on the floor. They elevated to top 5 offense in the league. His scoring was unmatched, and then the talent around him wasn't the best. So I don't know if I would take 09 D-Wade over any Kobe, but I can understand your biases, you know what I'm saying? And I mess with D-Wade because he's from Chicago and all, but over any Kobe year is crazy.
The year you're talking about 06, with Kobe on the floor that year, they had a 111 offensive rating, which I believe would have ranked 3rd or 4th, if I remember correctly. Obviously, Dallas were number 1, like we alluded to earlier.
Yeah.
I believe Phoenix were number 2 or 3, and I think Seattle was actually the 2nd or 3rd best offense in the league that year. I'll check just so I make sure I'm not lying to the people. I always want to make sure I'm not lying to the people. Okay, Dallas number 1, like I said, 111.8. Phoenix number 2, 111.5, and Seattle number 3, 111.1. With Kobe on the floor, the Lakers in 05-06 had an offensive rating of 111.4. So the equivalent, basically, of the 06 Phoenix Suns. That's what they had with Kobe on the floor.
I'm telling you, man, y'all gotta put some respect on it, man.
When Kobe was off the floor, and this is not me making, I'm looking at it right now. When Kobe was off the floor, the Lakers offense was 11 points below the worst offense in the league. Not below league average. They were 11 points worse than the worst offense in the NBA at the time. So I want to just make sure when we talk about relative offensive rating and relative defensive rating, that's relative to the league average. The Lakers were 11 points below the worst team in the NBA. That's how bad they were offensively without Kobe Bryant. For reference, that's the Portland Trailblazers, who had a 101.1 offensive rating, the worst mark in the NBA. The Lakers had a 90.8 offensive rating. 90. Per 100 possessions without Kobe Bryant, they had a 90 offensive rating. That's ridiculous. That's one of the best floor-raising offensive seasons we've ever seen. And don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. That's one of the most impactful seasons ever. And I think that number illustrates it. They were a plus 4.5 with Kobe on the floor. They were a negative 8.7 with him off the floor. That team needed everything Kobe gave them. So yeah, I'd probably take 06 Kobe over D-Wade in 09. But I do think 09 Wade is one of the highest single season shooting guard peaks of all time. Just unfortunately, Kobe Bryant is slightly better. Drink More Water holding similar sentiment. He's talking about D-Wade shooting, basically agreeing with me about D-Wade not being the greatest shooter. But his hot take is that the same way people clown on Westbrook for not being able to shoot, Wade needs the same energy. Westbrook has a better 3-point percentage on larger volume, has a similar career mid-range percentage. So I'm gonna just ask you, are D-Wade and Westbrook similar shooters?
I would take no, because to start Westbrook's career, he was a solid mid-range shooter, though. He was a solid pull-up mid-range shooter. But I would put him in the same tier. Like, I wouldn't be like, oh, one's substantially better than the other as a shooter. So I would put him in the same tier. I think both of them are extremely dangerous downhill players. And I think I think you can slow down D Wade's game a little bit more than you can slow down Westbrook's game. So I think I'm going way far from the question, but yeah, I think they're in the same tier as I think they're the same tier as shooters.
I think you look at it statistically. Dwayne Wade was typically in the higher percentiles as mid-range shooting, and this comes back to like relative to era stuff. Year 2, he was in the 61st percentile, then 68, then 70th. Then in 08, where he was dealing with an injury, he was in the 42nd percentile. 09, 79th, then 2010, 48th, then 72, 77, 77, 95, 78. And then you get like the out of prime D Wade years 44, 61, 41, 46, 46. Westbrook never really matched that besides like a couple years. Like he came in 37th percentile as a mid-range shooter, 16th in year 2, 24th, 67 in 2012. He shot 41% from mid-range that year. The next year, 35th percentile, then 69th, then 46th, then 75th, then 23rd percentile, then 48th percentile. In 2019, Russell Westbrook was in the 9th percentile for mid-range shooters. And then 50, 43, 36, 13, 61. It doesn't match up relative to the era in which they played, which I think is the biggest difference. So I do think D-Wade is obviously the better shooter for me. I don't think they're particularly similar, especially when you do relative to era. Like I say, 43% from mid-range is different in 2007 as it is in 2016. Just the league is different. The points per possession is different. The value of a half-court possession is different. So that's why I would say no, but raw percentage-wise, they are relatively similar. Weston742 said no NBA take, but appreciate the conversation. Thank you, Weston. If you are appreciating the conversation, like the video. We are going over time right now because you guys seem to just be rattling off takes. So seems like you guys are enjoying it, but like the video if you are. And we might do this some more. I don't know how often, but we might do this some more. Duke Blaylock said Tony Parker top 10 point guard of all time. Do you think Tony Parker's top 10 point guard of all time?
I think he's on the outside looking in. I want to see if I can hold on. Magic, Steph, Isaiah, Stockton, Nash, Jayson.
Is this in order, by the way, or are you just
no? This isn't in order at all. This isn't in order at all. I'm just rattling names off. 6. I have 6 right there. Let me restart. Magic, Steph, Isaiah, Stockton, Cade, Nash. Would you say? I would say. I don't necessarily think so.
Did you say Chris Paul?
I didn't say Chris Paul. Sure didn't. I don't know if you would think James Harden is a point guard or a 2. I necessarily think he's a point guard, but he played the 2.
I tend to call him a shooting guard, but he has played the point for like 7 years of his career, so I understand it.
I'm gonna say James Harden was a point guard. I just think his game was more like a point guard than a shooting guard. And then I can see some people making arguments for him being 9th or 10th. But then again, I don't know if I necessarily see it.
Luckily for me, and we did on Player's Choice, we did a top 10 at each position all time.
Yeah.
So I have the list I made. It was Steph at 1, Magic at 2, Jerry West at 3, Oscar Robertson at 4, Chris Paul at 5, Steve Nash at 6, John Stockton at 7, Walt Frazier at 8, Jason Kidd at 9, and Russell Westbrook at 10. Now, do I still wholeheartedly agree with those 10 names in that order? No. But I do think they're all better than Tony Parker.
Yeah.
Then my honorable mentions were Gary Payton, Damian Lillard, Isaiah Thomas, and Luka Doncic, who I also think are all better than Tony Parker. So I've got 14 names that I think are better than Tony Parker on that list. So yes, I don't think Tony Parker was a top 10 point guard of all time. I do think Tony Parker is one of the best slashers and finishers of all time at the point guard position. Yeah. He gets a lot of love for his floater, but just in general, his ability to get to the rim and finish at a high clip is something that I don't think gets recognized. Not in the way it should, anyway. This is going to be my first time reading these numbers because I've actually never bothered to look them up. So if Tony Parker is not as good at the rim as I've been implying, I'm going to be very disappointed. But you got to remember, these are in the 2000s. So in 06, Tony Parker was in the 100th percentile. of players at the rim, finishing at 70%. He then followed that up at 64%. He then followed that up at, where are we? He then followed that up at 63%, 63%, 63%. That's to end the 2000s. Then in 2011, he's at 65, 2012, 65, 2013, 65. And this is all on extremely high volume. This is Tony Parker, a guy who's taken around 40% of his shots at the rim. And you can imagine a 6'2 guard taking 40% of his shots at the rim, finishing at 65, 66, 67% is ridiculous in the 2000s, with double bigs, traditional 7-footers at the 4 and the 5. Tony Parker is one of the best guard finishers of all time. So I think he doesn't get enough recognition for that. But overall, I'm probably not as high on his all-around game. But in that regard, that singular skill, I do think he is underrated in that regard. Magnum Opus, we kind of alluded to this, but he said, how do you guys feel about Scottie Pippen? IMO, he is not that player people tried to make him out to be. The whole Bulls Jordan couldn't win without Scottie narrative is crazy. Still a top 5 small forward though. So he thinks Scottie Pippen's overrated. He thinks they could have won without Scottie Pippen, but he is still a top 5 small forward. So I'm just asking you, do you think the Bulls could have won without Scottie Pippen?
No, I don't think they could have. I don't think they could have. I mean, now, do they get one? Are they the still 3-peat twice team? I don't think so. I think Scottie Pippen was extremely valuable to this Bulls team.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think winning without Scottie Pippen, it just depends on who's replacing him, who's not there.
Yeah.
Who is there in this alternate universe. That's always going to be relevant. So I don't like to play like those hypotheticals unless I have all the details of the hypothetical. Right now I'm just projecting like, what if we replace Scottie Pippen with someone better than Scottie Pippen? Like, okay, maybe they do still win. I don't know. But I think in general, I don't think he's overrated. I think he's overrated by people who use him to push an agenda. But I also think he's underrated by the same people who try to combat that agenda. I think if you look at Scottie Pippen for who he is and not as a pawn in a GOAT debate, which is
really what he is.
Quite frankly, that's what he is. Like Scottie Pippen is used as a pawn in the GOAT debate. The LeBron side of it is gonna say Scottie Pippen was the greatest player ever, and the Jordan side of it is gonna say Scottie Pippen needs a Michael Jordan. He was nothing without him. So if you look at him as an individual player and not that, I think you come out to he was an elite player. I think he is the best or second best wing defender ever. I think he is the 3rd best passing small forward ever. Unless I'm forgetting someone. I'm going to stick with 3rd, but if someone comes up with a name other than LeBron and Larry Bird, I will happily walk that back. But off the top of my head, 3rd. Elite playmaker, elite in transition. He did have a post game he could go to. He had a weird like bank shot floater thing he would go to, which was weird, but it went in. He could make mid-range jumpers and stuff. Like he was like the perfect guy to complement a guy like Michael Jordan. He was the perfect complement to an off-ball scoring wing, like a high volume off-ball scoring wing. Scottie Pippen just perfectly fit that mold. Grant Hill is a good name, but I do think Scottie Pippen might be a better passer than him. And then you said he is still a top 5 small forward though. For reference, when we did our top 10 small forwards, I did have Scottie Pippen at 5. So I would agree with you on that. I do think Scottie Pippen is a top 5 small forward.
Question.
Yes.
Now, I did watch those videos, but I do not remember everybody's list. Where did you have Kawhi?
8. The longevity issues was
yeah, I can see that.
Peak for peak. If I were to rank this list, peak for peak. So for reference, for anyone who was wondering, when we made this list, I want to say this is over 6 months ago now.
Yeah, this was fresh on the PC.
My list was LeBron at 1, Bird at 2, KD at 3, Dr. J at 4, Scottie Pippen at 5, Rick Barry at 6, John Havlicek at 7, Kawhi at 8, Paul Pierce at 9, and Elgin Baylor at 10. Peak for peak, I would probably have LeBron at 1, Bird at 2, KD at 3, Dr. J at 4, Kawhi at 5, Rick Barry at 6, Scottie Pippen at 7, John Havlicek at 8. Elgin Baylor's there. I don't know. I'd have Kawhi higher if it was peak for peak, is what I'm saying. I'm I'm not about to stand on something that I haven't really
Yeah.
thought out. Yeah, I haven't really thought this out, and I don't want to be held to like, well, you said this guy's peak is better. I'm like, well, I said it off the cuff. So scratch that. I would have Kawhi higher if it was based on just peaks. There we go. That's what I'll stick to. Toaster Goat said, who do you guys think is the best ceiling raiser? I already answered this earlier in answering a different question. I said I think it's Steph, but you never answered. So who do you think is the best ceiling raiser?
That's hard to. I don't know. Like I do think you convinced me on the Steph thing. I do think you convinced me on the Steph thing. So fuck it. Steph. There you go.
There we go. And as someone who values ceiling raising over floor raising, I think that's the case for Steph to be top 10, maybe top 5, is the ceiling raising, him being the best ever. The thing I find probably the most valuable is a very compelling top 5 case. We've got 4 more. I'm going to answer the smaller ones first because they'll be quicker. XXX is the GOAT. Similar to the Luka question, is Ant's 3-point shooting an outlier or an improvement?
I think this is a legitimate improvement because this is something he needed with this situation around him. Like just being able to, because one, they're going to play drop on Anthony Edwards, because in the end of the day, if Anthony Edwards is taking 14 threes coming into the game or coming into the season, that's something you wanted, which is versus the other option, just him getting to the rim at will. So I would much rather have Anthony Edwards shoot the 3 than get lanes downhill every single possession, time after time after time. So the fact that he was able to become one of the best pull-up shooters in the league over an offseason, that's extreme improvement for me. And I don't think he's going to be as hot as he was at points in this season, but I do think that's going to be something that you have to worry about.
I think it's both. I think he's improved, but it's hard for me to believe he's improved to this degree. Like Anthony Edwards has quite possibly been the best 3-point shooter in the league.
Yeah, if you points for a pull-up 3, something.
Yeah, I don't know if he's improved to that degree, but I think it's pretty obvious he's improved. So do I think in the postseason this will sustain? I don't know. Maybe if the Timberwolves make it, it's actually not even a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, it's not.
But long term, do I expect Anthony Edwards to be a 43% 3-point shooter on 10 threes a game? Probably not, because I think the only person who's ever done that is Steph Curry. So I have a hard time believing that's who he is consistently. But I do think he's a better 3-point shooter than he has been in previous years. And I think the one thing about Ant is his pull-up 3-point shooting has always gotten better in the postseason. So that is like the sample or something that you can rely on. It's like he's gotten better at that in the postseason every time. So we've seen that sample of like against the tougher defenses when teams do dare him to shoot. As you said, teams are going to play drop on him. I think he has obviously gotten better at that, recognizing that those are the looks he's going to get. But it's hard for me to say he's improved to the point where he might be the best 3-point shooter in the league. So that's where I'm probably hesitant. So I would say it's an improvement, but I think the degree of the improvement is slightly an outlier to probably where he truly is as a shooter. But if this is who he truly is, when he gets legitimate floor spacing, oof, I'll say that. That's what I'll say. Oof. Alan R with some words of encouragement said, keep doing these, little bro. Dub show. Thanks, Alan R. Thanks. Appreciate it. Hunter said, if not for injuries, KD would have had a pretty good chance at being the NBA's all-time leading scorer. That's a good one. What's your thoughts? Could KD have been the all-time leading scorer? Obviously, knowing LeBron's the current scorer with over 41,000.
I definitely think he has a case, but I definitely think you could do this for a lot of players if they were fully healthy. Because when I say when I hear things like that, like, oh, he could have been the all-time leading scorer if this would have happened, I go back because I think I heard something that maybe ruined all of these conversations for me. I think I heard you have to average 25 points per game for 15 straight seasons and play all 82 games to pass that record. And when I think about it like that, it's just like, that may not ever happen. That may not ever happen. So it's like, I don't know.
Well, I think he could have passed Kareem. I'll say that.
I definitely think that.
LeBron setting the record out so far is kind of hard for me to say like KD would have caught that. But like KD from his rookie year to 2014, so before his first major injury in 2015, had already scored nearly 15,000 points. He was at 14,851 points. And he did that in 542 games. So if we just do that as an average, so 542 games, 14,851 points. Kevin Durant in that stretch was averaging 27.4 points per game. And then you look at his averages from his first major injury to today, he is averaging 27.1 points per game. The issue is, in those first 6 years, he played 542 games. In the decade since, he's played 551.
That's just crazy.
That's the issue. Crazy. So from 08 to 2014, which I think is 7 seasons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 seasons. He averaged 27 points a game, 27 and a half, and played 542 games. From 2015 to today, as of today, the 22nd of January, 2025, he has played 551 games and is still averaging 27. So if he doesn't miss 50 plus games in 2015, if he doesn't miss the whole of the 2020 season, if he doesn't miss half of the 2021 season, if he doesn't miss again half of the 2023 season, yes, I think he's probably approaching Kareem in the next season or two. So Kareem, I think, was doable because right now Kevin Durant on his career is going to be at 30,000 by the end of the season. He's at 29,796. You add the extra 2-3 seasons of missed games, 27 points a game. What's that? 27, let's say 27 times 75. That's 27 times 75. That's another 2,000 points. And that's just, again, that's 2,000 points a season. So you add extra 4,000 points into it. Yeah, he'd be approaching Kareem. LeBron is just kind of a different animal because, like, LeBron's been healthy and is in year 22. KD's only in year 17. That would be difficult. But LeBron, I think, was doable. I think Kareem was doable. I think he probably would have hit 40,000. I think that's probably where he would have got to, but I don't know about LeBron. And then the final super chat, MP13 said, was it a mistake for early in Tatum's career, the Celtics supplemented his playmaking deficiencies with the plethora of guards they signed to compensate instead of accelerating his playmaking growth with pure high-level reps? So basically, was it wrong of the Celtics to try and mask his playmaking flaws with high-level guards as opposed to playing through his playmaking flaws in the pursuit of development? I think that's a good question. What's your thoughts?
I think when Jayson Tatum came into the league, this was a Celtics team that was already trying to win. So it was like maybe that could cost us a playoff series. Maybe that could cost us a championship run if we really give the ball to this 20, 21-year-old this early. But I think once they realized, okay, Jayson Tatum may be the guy that we can run our offense through, they got rid of Marcus Smart. They brought in KP. They brought in Drew Holiday. So I definitely think that them being around may have improved Jayson Tatum's just ability to see the floor just playing with a bunch of good guards. But I think once they realized that this could be the guy that we run our offense through, especially with him putting the ball on the floor and making decisions for everyone on the team, that's when KP came in. That's when Drew Holiday came in, and they really decided to run that team through Jayson Tatum and have him be the main decision maker.
Yeah, I think if you're talking strictly from a player development standpoint, yes, I don't think it was optimal for Jayson Tatum. But I think the issue you run into, and this is why it's hard for like contending teams to also develop talent simultaneously, especially talent like Jayson Tatum. Them going down what I would believe to be the right avenue of developing JT would have led to them losing more and not contending. So it would have been, in the short term, it would have been worse for Boston because they wouldn't have made the conference finals in his rookie year. They wouldn't have made the conference. Were they in the conference finals in 2020? Yeah, they were. Right?
2020, they were against the Heat, yeah.
They wouldn't have made the conference finals in 2020 because they would have been pursuing Jayson Tatum's development, and they probably would have been a lot more flawed in the postseason.
Probably would have lost to the Raptors. That was a really good
So I think for Jayson Tatum's development, it wasn't perfect, but for the betterment of the team, it was perfect. And I think it just slowed down Jayson Tatum's development by a couple years. And I understand for an individual, maybe losing a couple years of your career is like to develop later is probably not ideal. But I think generally speaking, I think when you're pursuing that, I think it's hard to just sacrifice winning in pursuit of development. And then he clarified, he said, sure, but from 21 on. I think 21 is where that started to happen kind of organically. And that's in large part because you saw the regression of guys like Kemba Walker. And then you saw like in the postseason when guys were in and out of the lineup. I think Kemba wasn't fully healthy. I don't even think Kemba was there the whole postseason series against Brooklyn. And he organically got the reps that he hadn't got previously because, quite frankly, they didn't have anyone else. So, and then in 22, they put the ball in Jayson Tatum's hands, and we saw the playmaking flaws that could have been ironed out 3 years prior. In 2019, those flaws could have been ironed out, but he had to go through it in 2022 on the biggest stage because he didn't have the opportunity to go through it earlier, which I guess could have hurt him. But I don't think it ultimately slowed down the timeline much. I still don't think Boston would have won without major talent and roster upgrades that ended up coming on time anyway. So I'm gonna lean towards no. I don't think it hurt anyone really, if I'm being honest. I think Jayson Tatum has gone through pretty much an optimal situation. I think what makes Jayson Tatum so good is that he didn't come in with the superstar treatment. He came in, quite frankly, as a role player. And he still does a lot of those role player things today. And I don't say that as an insult. I think a superstar who does the role player things is extremely valuable because you also do the superstar things. You also create advantages, but you also can play off of other people's advantages, which is something that a lot of superstars can't do because they're so used to creating all the advantages. So I think Jayson Tatum's had quite an optimal development, in my opinion. Obviously not perfect, but as close to it in a winning environment I think you can have. So that's my take on that. And then final super chat, not a take, but a question. Salute to the panel. Start, bench, cut today. So rank them 1 through 4, basically. Melo, Cade, Anthony Edwards, Jalen Williams. I'm going to leave that to you, John.
I'm going to start Ant. I'm going to bench Cade, bench Jdub, and I'm cutting LaMelo. It's not the most comfortable thing, but I'm sorry.
So wait, repeat that.
Start Ant, bench Jdub and Cade, and I'm cutting LaMelo.
Okay, so basically you're saying Ant's the best player, Jdub's the second, Cade is the third, and LaMelo's the fourth. Mm-hmm. I'm starting Ant. Jdub and Cade, I don't know, because Jdub's offense is throwing me off.
I can see that.
Defensively, I think he's quite clearly the best player here, but offensively, there's a lot to be desired. I think LaMelo's the worst player of the four currently. And part of that is because I think situation is not benefiting him in terms of the things he's being asked to do. And I don't think it's optimal. I think he's more talented than his impact suggests, if that makes sense. I just don't think he's playing a winning brand of basketball. But I don't think that's because he can't play a winning brand of basketball. But when the question is start, bench, cut today, I'm factoring in what's going on today. But then at the same time, it's like, if he's on my team, would I have him playing that brand of basketball?
Hell no.
So then it's like, if I just look at LaMelo in a vacuum, I don't think he's the worst player here. I'm now talking myself out of LaMelo and last. Damn, that's a good one. I'm going to say Ant is the best player of the bunch. Then I'm going to say Who am I going to say? When we did our top point guards list, who did I have higher, Cade or LaMelo?
I don't think you had either one of them in the top 10.
I didn't, but
You had Cade
I
higher
think
than
I did.
LaMelo. Yeah, you had Cade higher in the top 10 under 23 though. If that means something.
I did. Yeah, that's it. That's what we did. And Cade, LaMelo, Jdub. I think is what I'm going to go. I think that's what I'm going to go with. And Cade, LaMelo, Jdub. I think that's the order I'm going to go with. Yeah, I spoke myself out of LaMelo in last because of my theoretical team I would create that would. But then it's like, do I think LaMelo will change a whole bunch if in a winning situation? And Cade, Jdub, LaMelo. There we go. I'm not confident on this, by the way. So no one hold me to I said this guy's better than this guy. I don't believe in this really at all. So and Cade, Jdub, LaMelo. That's what I'm gonna say. And Cade, Jdub, LaMelo. And that brings us to the end.
Yes, it does.
We've gone twice as long as I expected. I'd like to say that's because you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But I guess I'll never know until I see how the likes look and the comments after the fact. But it seems as if you guys enjoyed it, and that's good. I had fun, John D. I know I told you this was probably going to be about an hour. And it's been over an hour, but I hope you enjoyed it. And
you always enjoy Sundays and now Wednesdays. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, don't say it like this is a weekly thing. We'll see. I'll probably put something on the community tab asking how often you guys want to see this. Probably have the options of once a week, once every 2 weeks, and once a month. Those will probably be the 3 options. But yeah, if you guys did enjoy, leave a comment of your takes, leave a comment on your thoughts on our takes, and then just ask questions. If we don't respond to them in next week's video or whenever this next video is, because you guys sent a lot of super chats to ask questions, so obviously they're going to get priority. I will respond to comments with my answers, probably to the community tab questions, because we only answered 2 of them. So yeah, but also leave your questions and stuff. But yeah, I had fun. John D had fun. Thank you guys for everyone watching. I think we had about 200 people in here at one point. But before we get out of here, John D, where can everyone find you?
You guys can find me over at the Buzzer Sports. A lot of draft content over there, a lot of film breakdown. We're also going to be doing a lot to improve the channel now that we just got monetized. So be on the lookout for that. So once again, I reply to all comments. I try to be as consistent as I possibly can. So everybody that does find their way over there, I hope you enjoy the content. Appreciate it.
There we go. As always, John D's links are in the description. Make sure to subscribe over here. Subscribe to John D's channel, of course. Like the video, leave a comment. It makes the video do better on the algorithm, I'm told. And then we will see you guys on Sunday for the Hoop Talk pod. And then we'll see when we ever see you again for this. This might be the one and only show. Who knows? But thank you guys for watching. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.